Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another in-depth formation guide where today we have got the much talked about 4-2-2, which seems to be a pretty popular formation this year in FIFA. So I just wanted to run through it and just give my opinion and thoughts as to why this is one of the best formations this year in FIFA. Now, the 4-2-2 is never a formation that people have really gone for in FIFA previous years, because it's just never been a formation. You know, the narrow formations, people have always gone 4-1-2-1-2 narrow, or 4-3-1-2. They've never gone with a 4-2-2. But this year, these wide attacking midfielders seem to be very, very popular in FIFA this year. But starting off with some positives of this formation, why it's really good. We can see the amount of triangles we've got, again, with like to Dean, Firmino, Fabinho. We've got Dean, Fabinho to Van Dijk, and then the exact same on the other side. And then we've got Firmino to Mane, Fabinho as the attackers, and then Rashford, Dembele, Pogba. So we've got lots of good passing triangles, which makes it very easy to pass between your players. There shouldn't be too many big gaps. It should be very easy to play that tiki-taka style of play and build it up the pitch. When we actually look at now this formation compared to the 4-2-3-1 narrow, we can see actually these wide attacking midfielders are slightly narrower than they're not quite as wide as they were in that formation. And why I think that's a big positive is because it means even more so, it's kind of exaggerating the problem even more, that they're not going to be marked by anyone, because they're not playing wide enough as wingers to be marked by fullbacks, and they're also not playing narrow enough to be marked by the CDMs, and they're not playing high enough to be marked by the centre-backs. So they're kind of always in open space. The only positions that could possibly mark them is if somebody is playing a flat midfield and their left and right centre midfielders could possibly be on those positions, but not many people play flat midfields in FIFA because that has its own problems. For example, not having a CDM in this game means that anyone that plays with a cam, that cam is going to be free, and vice versa. If the guy's not playing with an attacking midfielder, it's going to make it harder for him to link up to his striker. So not many people are going to play flat midfields. So typically these players are going to be unmarked the majority of the time, and for the guy to press you and get out to those players, he's going to have to pull one of his CDMs across, which is going to create some space. He's going to have to pull his fullback out, which then makes space in behind. So it creates a big problem defensively, these cams, because nobody really marks them. Now, obviously, every formation does have a negative. There is no perfect, unbeatable formation in any set of football games. Every formation has a weakness, and the weakness with this formation actually is the fact that it doesn't have that central cam. Because it does make it more difficult, obviously, to link up through the middle. If you're someone that likes to play through the middle, you now don't have that central cam that links everything up to your wide cams, links it up to your strikers. So that's central cam. But the biggest problem, I think, for not having a central cam is the fact that he now has a lot of space. In that position, if you think about what player plays in that position, it is the CDM. Anyone that plays with a CDM is going to play right in the middle of that big gap of space now that you've got. And the problem is that CDM now is going to have no pressure on him, because now you have the problem where you don't have anyone to mark him. You're going to have to either pull one of your wide cams in, which then leaves space out wide. You're going to have to pull one of your strikers, which I think is probably the best way to try and defend, because now the only difference between this formation and the 4-2-3-1 is your cam, that central cam, has now become a second striker. So that second striker now is the one that needs to come back and just press that CDM and get him under pressure. So going into the instructions first before we go into the tactics. Now, some things that you can do if you wanted to cover that and plug that hole, what you could do, and people may suggest, is you could switch one of your strikers to play false 9. The reason why I think that's just a bad idea is because if you make him a false 9, all you've done is you've just made your formation 4-2-3-1 again. He's just now become that central cam. So you may as well just play the 4-2-3-1. So I don't think playing that false 9 is the way to go. I think if you're going to play this formation, you need to just accept that space is going to be there. But by you having a second striker, it's going to give him more problems in behind, because you've now got two strikers for him to worry about runs in behind as opposed to one. So you give up that space in that midfield, but you make yourself a little bit more attacking by having that second striker. So on these second strikers, we want them both on getting behind. We want them both on stay central is probably the way to go. I think, with the instructions, because we want them to get in behind, especially if we've got quick, pacey strikers. Want them to run on in behind and create problems. Want them to stay central, because we don't want them to drift out wide, because we've already got those wide cams, and we don't want them to kind of get in the way of each other, and then we've got no one in the midfield to score any goals and to create those chances. As for the wide cams, I'm actually going to leave them all on basic. I don't think any of the instructions really are necessary for these. We don't want them coming back on defence because we don't want to be getting too defensive, so we want them on basic. Crossing runs we always want on basic, and then interceptions and position, we want that to stay pretty much as basic as possible. So the wide cams we're actually going to leave as standard. Now the CDMs, what we want to do with the CDMs is we're going to put those on cover centre, because those wide cams are now going to come back on defence as and when needed on that balance. So they're going to come back and defend when they need to. We don't need to have that space covering out wide. We don't need those CDMs to cover that space out wide. So we're going to have them on cover centre. Going to have them on stay back while attacking. Now the defensive behaviour is down to what you want. Do you want them on cut passing lanes? Do you want them to intercept passes? Or do you want them touch tight and you want them to man mark and be on top of the opposition's cams, the opposition's strikers? Do you want them to man mark? Typically, most people will go with cut passing lanes. I think that's probably the one we'll stick with in this formation. We'll stick with cut passing lanes. I don't think that's necessarily a bad way to go. It's typically the way that I go when I play with CDMs. I typically ask them to cut passing lanes, but you could ask them to man mark. That could be an option you could try and see if that works for you. Now, also, if you wanted to cover that space in behind, if you didn't want to drop that second striker in to cover that cam spot, what you could actually do is you could tell one of your CDMs to get forwards. You could tell him to get forwards, and he can now be the guy that plugs that gap. Now, what it does do is it makes you a little bit more open defensively, because now you don't have two DMs. If you were going to do this tactic, what you'd have to do is you'd have to tell your fullbacks to stay back. You would not be able to let your fullbacks go forward, because then if your fullbacks go forward and that guy goes forward, you've now only got one CDM and two centre backs doing defending. So you have to kind of give up somewhere if you want to do that. But typically for me, the way I play, I would recommend just have them on stay back while attacking your CDMs. I wouldn't worry too much about that central cam spot being open. So now moving into the tactics for this team, this 4-2-2 formation. Now for me, I would always recommend going on pressure on heavy touch. I always think that's a pretty good option to go with, because you do want to apply a little bit of pressure on the guy. As I said, you don't want to go too crazy on constant pressure. It's not really a formation that you want to drop back in, so I definitely think it's a formation for pressure on heavy touch. And as we've explained many times before, we don't want to go too wide, or we don't want to go too narrow, because it creates its own problems. So we want to just keep the width and the depth. I think pretty much on 6. I think that's the way to go. We don't want to go too far back as always, because then it does make it very difficult to get out. And we don't want to go too far forward, because it does leave that space in behind to get countered very, very easily. So we want to keep that depth, I think, on about 6, possibly 5. I think 6, just to play a little bit higher. I just like to kind of push my opponents a little bit further back in their own half. So I think 6 is probably the recommended width and depth I'd go for there. Now, offensive style, this one is again, it's kind of up for interpretation. Some people may recommend fast build-up. Some people have suggested in previous videos that fast build-up is a good way to go, and it could be a good way to go. It depends on your style of play. If you're someone that likes to play, a slow, methodical style of FIFA, you playing fast build-up is not going to help, because it's going to mean all your players kind of are a bit more erratic. They're not going to stick to their positions as much. It's going to be a lot more of a fast-paced game, and if you're someone that likes to play quite slowly, you playing fast build-up doesn't make any sense. You have to play a style of FIFA that fits the way you play. Your tactics, your instructions, they have to fit the way that you play. So if you play the game quite slowly, playing fast build-up is just counterproductive. So if you play quite slowly, playing something like possession is a good way to go. Me personally, I think I'd probably just keep this on balance, because I want to be the one to trigger offensively a lot of the runs. I like to be the one that triggers when they're running behind. I like to be the one that triggers who carries the ball, who moves to the ball. I think long ball is a secondary option you could pick with this formation, especially if you've got fast players up front. If like your strikers and your wide cams are quick, long ball is probably the better tactic to go with, because you want to be playing those balls in behind. So long ball is a good option. I'm someone that personally, sometimes I like to go long and put those balls in behind, and sometimes I like to have possession. So that's why I personally like to go on balance. Width-wise, as the same with the defensive, I'm going to keep it balanced on around 6. Typically, I have the defensive a little bit deeper, but with this formation, I think having those two strikers, I want to push up a little bit higher, just a little bit, just to kind of really try and push him and create some pressure. So offensively, The width, I want to keep on about 6. I want to try and keep that the same as the defensive. If your width and offensive and defensive are different, it can create an issue sometimes. It's more in transition when you lose the ball. Your players kind of get a little bit confused in this game as to how wide or narrow they should be. So something I would always try and recommend is that you keep your width for your offense and defense the same, because the computer does kind of get a little bit confused. If you, for example, had the width, for example, on 2 and this on 6, the computer sometimes gets a little bit confused as to where its positioning should be. The positioning becomes a little bit skewed, and it can create its own problems. So I always would say try and recommend keeping them on about the same, keep them on about 6, or at least keep them on the same number, or within maybe one click of it. Now, players in the box, again, this one is kind of down to your play style. If you're playing this 4-2-2 formation, I would recommend you'd want not a crazy amount of players in the box. I think your wide cams, typically I would say you want them more on the edge of the box than getting into the box. I wouldn't say you want them too high, because if you go too high, it always creates the opportunity for a counter attack in this game. So I would probably go for something like 4. I'd probably just want my strikers to be the ones that are getting into the box rather than my cams. My cams are getting into the box with my strikers. It then leaves a big gap on a counter attack, for example, between my strikers and cams and where my CDM's position is going to be. It's going to leave a little bit of a big gap. So if the guy does clear the ball, he's then got a lot of area to work with and possibly get a counter attack off. And then corners and free kicks, as I've always said, it's down to how you play the game. Personally, I'm not someone that ever really does too much on free kicks. Typically, I go short and then just carry on playing as if I didn't get the free kick. So I'm not someone that really has many players in the box on free kicks. Plus, by doing this, it also limits the amount of counter-attacks I can possibly concede, because that's the most important thing in this game. You want to try and limit as many counter-attacks as possible, because a lot of people do play with like crazy pace, so you don't want to have too many players counter-attacking you. Corners, I'd probably keep the corners on standard, because sometimes I like to go short, and because I've got someone like Virgil van Dijk in my team, every now and then I want to try and whack a near post corner in and see if Van Dijk can get his head on it. So I'll probably will keep the corners on about 3 for me. But these are the tactics, these are the instructions, and this is the formation and why it is very good, guys. So this has been another in-depth guide on this 4-2-2 formation, which is a very popular formation this year. I think that's always good to have. It's always good to have multiple formations. We've already been through the 3-5-2, and that's a very good attacking formation at the end of a game, the last 10 minutes. We've got the 4-2-3-1, which is an incredibly meta formation, and we've got this 4-2-2 formation as well, which I think is another incredibly meta formation to use. It's always good to have a lot of different formations and tactics in your arsenal to try. You don't want to just go into a game with the same tactics, the same formation for the whole 90 minutes and just expect something to happen. If nothing's happening, you do need to be able to adapt and change formation, which is what this one is. It's another formation to use in your arsenal. But I recommend going and trying it out, going and adjusting with these tactics yourself and seeing what works for you. But that is it for the video, guys. So if you did enjoy this and you did enjoy this in-depth guide, make sure you drop a thumbs up. Make sure you hit that subscribe button as well if you're new to the channel. And that's all today, guys. Have an awesome day. I'm out.